What's going on, guys? So last video we finished installing the coilovers. Now in this video we're going to go ahead and adjust them so I can get the ride height that I want. I'm going to start with the rear again, and I actually already have the wheels off of the car. So I'm going to plug in the clip of where you can see the ride height of the rear. You can see how low it's sitting. Actually not very low, pretty damn close to stock height. So what I'm thinking is I'm just going to lower another ½ an inch. I think that'll be set for the rear. It's not much, but if you remember, guys, I ended up with some monster truck fitment on the front. So look at this. I still have some monster truck fitment here in the front. So that was really bad. It's gonna have to drop a lot on the front. For now, I'm gonna do one side on my own, and then I'm gonna record the other side. Right now, the rear of the vehicle is up in the air. So I'm gonna show you guys how I measured from the front. So what some people do is they will actually measure from the ground. So right now it's on the ramp, so I'm measuring from the ramp pressure up to the top of the fender, and that's how much you'll know or want to lower the car, whatever you decide. So as you can see in the front, there's a lot much lower that it can go. But what I actually am doing is I'm doing it a different way. I'm just measuring the wheel gap and then going from there on how much I want to take off. So when we go to the rear here, like I told you guys before, I already did this side because I wanted to do one side on my own before I did the other on camera. And now I'll go in depth on this side and how we're going to do it. But I just wanted to show you guys with the tape measure here how I'm basically measuring. So you can choose to measure the gap itself or from the ground all the way up to the top of the fender or quarter panel, whichever side you're doing first. And we're going to keep that measurement in our mind or write it down somewhere so that you know how much you want to take off. For the rear, I'm doing ½ an inch. So I already took ½ an inch off on this side, but I'll show you guys how I did that with the spring on a divorce setup. Here we have the wheel off already, and you can see that I already kind of put some pressure on the bottom of the arm here, so it's pushing up the shock. What I want to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and release the tension off the spring entirely. I know some people like to adjust the spring while it still has pressure, and I feel like that takes forever and it takes a really long time. I found it easier on the other side to just kind of relieve all tension on the spring and do it by hand rather than with the wrench. So I'll show you guys more in depth of what I'm talking about. But for now, before we also do anything, and before I take the bolt off of the shock here, I'm going to unlock this collar here. So I'm going to hit that, and it's going to go counterclockwise to loosen that collar. And if you have used shocks and springs which have threads on them that are kind of dirty, make sure to wipe them down or spray them down with brake cleaner and then clean them off with the rag. And then if you find it really hard to use one of those spanner wrenches over here to loosen that collar, what you can do is grab a pry bar and a hammer and place the pry bar on one of those edges and hit the end. So that will really loosen it up and make it easier to get loose. So what I'll do right now is I'm going to loosen that collar, and then we'll go to the next step. So there, the collar's now loose, and I can rotate it, and you can hear how dirty that is. So make sure you go over it once again and clean it up, just to make it easier to adjust this shock, which will also be adjusting along with the spring. So now I'm able to go ahead and take off this bottom bolt of the shock here. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off. And we still have pressure here on the arm, so the whole assembly here won't entirely drop off. I still have some support. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Before I adjust the shock at all, we're going to start with the spring. So I'm going to measure from the top of the spring to the top of the bottom collar there. So I'm basically just measuring the thread height that I have right now, which should be 1.25 inches because I already did the other side. So I'll go ahead and grab the tape measure here and measure that out. So it is 1.25 inches, and I wanted to drop the ride height another 1/2 inch. Remember, this isn't going to be perfect. It's kind of as best of a measurement as I could take. And the suspension might still settle a little bit. So always give yourself a little room than try to get it exact. Because if it settles and it goes less than what you wanted, you'll just end up having to redo everything again. So with 1.25 and me wanting to drop it another 1/2 inch, I'm going to lower it down to 3/4. So the measurement from the top of the spring here of the threads to the top of this collar, right, top collar here, is going to be 3/4 once I'm done. Right now it's 1 1/4. So what I want to do is I'm going to mark this notch here with some blue tape just so I know my starting point. But before I do that, I want to unlock both of these. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with the spanner wrenches. I'm going to get these loosened. So what this top collar is going to go to get loose is it's going to turn counterclockwise, and the bottom one is going to turn clockwise so that we can break this hold here. And then we should be able to adjust it. But right now I have pressure on this whole system right now, so I'll have to relieve that pressure once I break the hold on these so that I can easily take this spring out and adjust it. I relieved most of the pressure here from the assembly, and as you can see, I have that collar marked of where that top collar started, just to have it marked to see where I should end up when I retighten it. And I also want to show you guys that this is pretty loose now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust it the way it is right now. So I'm going to start spinning this top one. You can see how easy that spins. All the way until I get 3/4 and then leave it at that measurement. So you can see how much of the difference of the thread is in between here now. So I'll just have to keep measuring until I can measure out 3/4, and then the bottom collar will follow to make the proper adjustment. So then we can tighten it back up and then go back to putting pressure on the whole assembly so that we can finish it. Here you can see that it's all wonky and out of place because I adjusted it all the way to what I wanted. So the measurement here of the threads up here is now 3/4. And you can see the blue tape of where my collar started here out in the front. So that's why that's there. And what I really did was, just for you guys who are doing this adjustment, is I held the threads and the top collar and spun the bottom collar. So holding the threads and the top collar. Because if you only hold the top collar, then it's going to spin everything and you're not going to be able to adjust the height. So make sure to hold the threads and the top collar and then spin the bottom collar on its own. So now that we're here and I have the proper height that I wanted, I'm going to pressurize the whole assembly here again. But once again, make sure that this is all center here and everything's centered on the top. So kind of adjust it while you're pressurizing the whole system again. And then we are ready to, once again, lock these back up. So I know this is a lot different from what other people do, but I found it a lot easier to do it this way on a divorce setup, because when I was trying to do it the original way of how everybody else does it, I was sitting here wrenching forever when I could just depressurize the whole system and do it by hand. And that literally took me like 40 seconds to adjust. So once again, I'm going to line everything back up to make sure it's in place, everything's center when I pressurize the whole system again. So the spring is now all done. I locked both of the collars back up. So you can see this tape is still there. And it's in the same spot as I started when the height was different. So that's all good and tightened. Now what we have to adjust is the shock. So because the shocks on these set of coilovers are used, so when I bought them, the guy didn't install the front struts, but he did install the rear shocks. And so they have about 100 miles on them. So these aren't spinning as easily as they should. For you guys, it should spin pretty easily so that you can adjust the shock. And once again, you'll want to jack up the whole assembly here 7 to 10 millimeters and adjust the shock so that it lines up with the hole. But for my case, I'm going to have to remove this shock entirely. So remove the top bolts and take it out, and then just try to break this corrosion or whatever it is so that it spins freely. So I won't show you guys adjusting the shock quite yet just because I have to do that. But once I have that broken freely so that it can spin, I'll show you guys me basically doing that 7 to 10 millimeter preload on the rear assembly here, and then spinning the shock assembly and lining it up with the hole. All right, guys, so I maxed out the height on the shock. So the thread's threaded in all the way to the bottom of the shock assembly here. And I also locked the collar. And you can see that the bolt is lined up and ready to go in. So I have to torque that down. And this, like I said before in the previous clip, this is all tight here. So I can remove the tape as well that I had as my marking. And after that bolt is torqued down, this side should be completely done. One question that I do have, and if any of you know, there is a lot of extra threading here for the shock to be adjusted, and I'm not even maxed out on the lowest setting of the spring here. And I am maxed out on the shock, so I'm wondering the limitations of the shock for BC Racing on this divorce setup, because I can't adjust the shock any further. And remember, guys, I raised this assembly 7 to 10 millimeters to kind of preload it so that I could adjust the shock, and it won't go up anymore. I mean, it's working for me for this height that I have right now, but if anyone else were to go any lower, this shock wouldn't adjust anymore. Just to let you guys know. So I'm going to finish up the side and we should be all set. And then I'll kind of put the camera off to the side and show you guys me lowering the car and see how well of a measurement I made and adjustment that I made, and see if we're sitting at the proper height now. All right, moment of truth, guys. So I'm going to drop the rear end and see how low it sits now. That's crazy. My measurement was pretty spot on, to be exact. So what I did worked out great, except I do think I may be too low for my offset and tire size. I mean, my calculation was right. I mean, I only can fit one finger in here now, but I don't know how that's going to work here in Wisconsin. I mean, it's pretty good fitment, but just an aggressive offset and tire. As you can see, maybe make some adjustments here during an alignment, but I don't really want too much camber. I'm not that kind of guy. So I may end up raising it up a little bit, but this will do for now. And as I said before too, this might even settle a little bit more. So it might be even worse for my case. But it's time to move to the front end now. The wheel is off on the front now. And what I ended up doing was my fender gap here for the wheel that I measured with the tape was 3 1/8. And I wanted to ideally get it down 2 inches. So 2 inches from 3 1/8 would be 1 1/8. And after taking off the wheel, I went ahead and measured the length of the threads as of right now. And I got 2 5/8. So if I were to go 2 inches from 2 5/8 it'd only be 5/8 left. That's what I'm going to shorten the coilover to. So with the fronts, it's a little different. What we're going to do is spin this locking collar counterclockwise, which will allow us to adjust the coilover. And if you guys remember from the last video, if you want to shorten the coilover, you will be using the top collar, and this will be rotated clockwise. But if you want to lengthen the coilover, you would have to use the bottom collar and turn it counterclockwise. So counterclockwise for the lower collar and clockwise for the top collar. So I'm going to get started on that. Here I got my measurement, and I put a piece of tape here as an indicator of my starting point. So it's going to take quite a while, but at least I have my marking point here. So I'm going to get started on that. And here I have the original BC Racing coilover spanner wrench, and I'm going to go ahead and find the lock. Okay, so I have it there, and I'm going to spin it. So this one's easy. Sometimes it'll be harder. Make sure to clean the threads with a microfiber towel and some brake cleaner if you want to. You might not need brake cleaner, just a towel, but go ahead and clean off the threads before you really start turning it, just so you don't get the threads dirty and it makes it harder to adjust the coilovers the next time that you either want to raise the car or lower the car even more. I'll get started on this now, and I'll show you guys when I'm done. Alright guys, I have the measurement that I wanted on the threads. The locking collar is also tight, so by tightening that clockwise, it is now locked down, so the height can't be adjusted anymore, and it is set. So the height should be properly adjusted for the front now, so I can throw on the wheels. I'm going to show you guys what it looks like right now. So once I drop the front end, we should be good, but I am going to be dropping it on the low profile ramps. But you should still get a good view of how it sits, and I'll be doing that right now. There it is, guys. So 5/8 in the front. It still has to settle a little bit more, and like I said, it's on the low pro ramps right now. The vehicle's a little inoperable right now because I'm doing a bunch of work to the engine. Otherwise, it's sitting just about where I wanted to. The rear is 3/4 of an inch, and you can see the gap there. Pretty minimal. I still don't know how stiff I'm going to run this suspension. Right now it's on max stiffness, so all the way to 30 on the front and the rear. So I'll work down from there. But as you guys can see, that measuring that I did worked out. So I got the fitment that I wanted. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I spent about a week doing this just because some downsides on my end was because I worked a lot. But also the suspension was kind of used. So the rear shocks had been used for 100 miles. So it was not fun adjusting those. And that's why you see a lot of people put on coilover covers. To minimize the corrosion on the shocks and the coilovers, be sure to clean those threads and keep them clean. And if you want to get coilover covers, do that. And that'll make adjusting the suspension so much easier. I wanted to mention that on the Z4 E89, the adjustment for the stiffness of the suspension in the front for the coilovers is on the top of the strut tower. So you just have a little knob and you turn it to soft or hard. Always start on hard because you'd rather it be too stiff than bottom out your car and then mess something up. And then for the rear on the shocks, there's an adjustment dial on the back of the shock, so you can access that from the underneath. And you can switch that over the same way that you do the front. And that is good on the Z4 because if they had it on the top on the Z4 in the rear, then like I showed you guys, you would have to remove that liner. That's really hard to remove on the Z4 every time that you would want to adjust the stiffness on the rear. So it's really good that they added that dial on the top back side of the shock underneath. So props to BC Racing on that part. That does it for today, guys, and I hope you find this video helpful. I'll catch you guys on the flip side.